You may have heard the phrase, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's certainly been true in my life. I'm surrounded by my parents right now, and I can say that both myself, my brother, who is also a youth minister, and my sister, who works in Christian higher education, who married someone that now works at a church, have all basically not fallen too far from the tree. I'm excited about this conversation because we're going to talk about the legacy of ministry and how if you're involved in ministry, whether it's professionally or otherwise, sometimes it can get a little messy. It's a messy business. So why don't we chat about it? Welcome to Clear Creek Chat. That's Chat with two T's because this podcast is coming to you from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and is a ministry of the Clear Creek Church of Christ. In each episode, we gather together a friend or two to talk about issues that touch our lives locally, but also have implications for the broader kingdom of God. My name is Mitchell Halstead, and today I am joined by my parents, Tim and Melinda Halstead. Welcome, folks. Pretty excited about this one. What we're going to talk about today is the idea of being involved in ministry, whether it's professionally or otherwise, can be kind of a messy business sometimes. But if you're willing to do it, invest in people, there is great worth involved in that. So both my parents have been involved in ministry for a very long time and currently are professionally involved in ministry, both of them in different ways. And I really want to kind of let you guys explain that first of all. So why don't we get a just brief resume? Dad, why don't you start? How have you been involved in ministry in your career? And Mom, you can chime in with the ways that you've been involved as well.
Well, I guess, as a child, I grew up in Brookings, South Dakota. My parents were converted by a little local Church of Christ member when I was 9. And we just went to church all the time, and never occurred to us to not be in some kind of church context. I went to college at York College. I was going to be an engineering major. And my freshman summer, I was asked to recruit for the college at Bible camp. So I went to 11 straight weeks of Bible camp. And after I survived that summer, I thought, I might kind of like this. I've got a little bit of a skill set with working with teenagers and junior high kids. So I actually changed majors to ministry, transferred from York, a 2-year school, to Lubbock Christian, and got my youth ministry degree. And in 1978, a long time ago, I moved to a suburb of Houston, Texas, Spring, Texas, and started working for the Spring Woodlands Church of Christ as their first full-time youth minister. And I did youth ministry for 17 summers. It wasn't quite 17 years, but we count youth ministry by summers.
That's right.
17 summers, and then transitioned into an assistant role, associate role. I did some small group work. I did ministry work for a while. I was executive minister for a season. Then the last several years there, I was the outreach minister, which is really a position I enjoyed a lot, where I got to kind of invite people into our church family. After about 26 years there, decided to go, God was calling us to plant a church. So we looked in some church planting organizations. The Churches of Christ didn't have a lot in Texas. So we actually partnered with a Christian church group called Stadia and the Golf Course Road Church of Christ in Midland, Texas, that wanted to get into church planting. And they hired us to plant a church in Odessa, Texas, a oil town next to Midland and the panhandle of Texas. And we moved there in 2005 with ourselves. You actually weren't much, you were already in college.
I was in college.
So we had both Connor and Darcy at home. And we hired another couple to come with us, to talk to another couple into coming with us with their 3 kids. So there's about
suckers.
Yep, there were about 9 of us that started this church, and we just started meeting people and inviting them to this new church. We called it New Life Church, and we spent several months on the ground, and then we launched that church in September of 2005, and we've been there for the last 15 years. Ups and downs and ins and outs, and so that's kind of my resume. So I'm the senior minister now of that church, and so it's been quite a ride. Mom came along a little bit later in the journey.
Well, I was raised in a family of faith, and so with small bouts of rebellion, continued in that vein, but never served in paid ministry until we moved to Odessa. Prior to that, I served the Lord, and when I married Tim, I was working for Exxon, but I did volunteer work, ran women's ministries, lots of retreat type stuff, that kind of thing. We hosted a small group in our home forever, and just things of that nature. Supported him in youth ministry, made relationships with the kids. But I never worked full time after I quit Exxon, which was when you were a baby, by the way. Never worked full time until we moved to Odessa. And then we were partners in ministry from the very get-go. And so I do work full time for New Life Church in kind of a discipling sort of a role. And
you wear all the hats, really.
Quite a few hats.
Well,
of course,
both of you
we
do.
all do.
Yeah,
we
that's
all
for
do.
sure.
But anyway, it's been a great ride.
So you guys have seen and been involved in a lot of people issues over the last, 40-ish years of being in ministry together. This is kind of an abstract question, but maybe you guys can distill some things into some little anecdotes for us. But how would you, if you're going to consider all of your experience in ministry, whether, as a volunteer supporter or as a paid person, into a few lessons, what would you say that might be beneficial to our listeners that might inspire them on their own efforts of disciple making? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the first lesson I would teach anybody or share with anybody is that discipleship really starts at home in the family. And I just think about my legacy. My parents, once they were converted, they were probably in their 30s. They raised 4 children that were all came to faith in Christ. And then I think they had 13 grandchildren, and they all grew up and came to faith in Christ. And I don't know how many great-grandchildren they ended up having. And most of them are on their journey to become faithful. So they've almost built a church just among their family themselves.
That's funny.
Then, as you said, we really spent a lot of time trying to make sure you kids were immersed in our church life and youth ministry and whatever was going on at church. And both you boys decided ministry was going to be your calling as you start. And as you said, Darcy married a young man that works at a church, and she's working for Christian College. So I just, I think there's a lot of big goals to try to convert your neighbors and the world around you, and we're involved with church planning and all that stuff. But if families will just really look at what they've got, right, what God's given them, and mentor those kids, raise them up to love the Lord, the kingdom is a pretty healthy place. So I would start with that. Mm-hmm. Mom might have something to share.
Well, just dovetailing with that, it's a lot about authenticity. People can see straight through you if you are not authentic. And sometimes that includes warts and all. Sometimes it includes, it always includes the many imperfections that we have, but it seems to endear people, and they seem to connect with you more when you're authentic.
Yeah, that actually goes well with that kind of the next question here. When you guys planted New Life Church, I don't know if it was a slogan or a motto or a mission statement, but one of the things you talked a lot about, and still do, I believe, is that you're a second chance church. Can you explain what that means exactly, and how does the choice to be a grace-filled second chance church lead to ministry being kind of messy sometimes, like you were saying, warts and all?
Well, yeah, that was kind of our statement of purpose. We're actually a celebrative, grace-filled second chance church. And that really kind of developed out of our experience in Odessa. We hadn't been in Odessa before, but we found Odessa was full of people that, it's a Texas community, a lot of churches there, probably similar to the Hickston area. And a lot of people had a church experience at some point in their life, but they just, more than half, probably 60 or 70%, had quit coming to church. So there were a lot of people there that just weren't part of a church experience. And as we started asking around, we realized that a lot of them quit coming because, bad behavior. They just didn't feel welcome. They just developed bad habits, so they were ashamed. Some of them had been divorced, so they've been, they're feeling shamed or kicked out of churches. Some had homosexual children. For whatever reason, they just didn't feel like church was any place was accepting of them anymore. And we looked at each other and thought, well, we need to be, Jesus was all about second chances and third chances. That's what redemption is. We ought to be a second chance church. And so we promoted that. And to our surprise, we started filling our church full of people that were looking for a second chance. You think we'd have known better or could have figured it out, but that's kind of what happened. And it's been quite a journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I think also, because we are pretty authentic. It's kind of like what you see is what you get. People want to tell us stuff. And like lots of times they'll say, I want to tell you my story. And we'll be like, well, is this
a cue, right?
Is this from before we knew you? Because if it is, we don't need to know it. We just love you where you are now. And they'll go, oh no, I want to tell you. And it's usually big. It's usually something very big.
Yeah. It's usually a get out the popcorn bucket because this is going to be
long and it's involved and it's dark. But it does not change the way we feel about them. I mean, they need the Lord. They need a church home. They because so many have been disenfranchised by a church at some point in their lives. They don't quite know what to do with a church that accepts them where they are. But it's tough to have that knowledge in your head sometimes about.
Well, I know y'all can't share all these personal stories, but I've heard so many stories over the last like 15 years or so that y'all been there, and some of them are shocking. You're like, what were you involved in? It's just unbelievable. But the fact that those people with these shocking stories find a place where they can find community and acceptance, but also challenge. Y'all don't just say, oh, sure, continue to live your life of sin. No, you're redeeming them from that, but they're not afraid to bring it to the church. That's so important. And one thing I kind of want to know, again, this whole context, the three of us are people that are professionally paid church people, but most people listening are not that and probably never will be. And so one of the reasons we want to do this podcast is to help people understand that no matter what context they find themselves in, whether they're just a regular employee at a business or a volunteer in church, or, we interviewed a fireman and a lady that does painting at the aquarium, and it doesn't matter where you are, you can be involved in this process of disciple making. And that involves getting, up to your elbows sometimes in the mess of other people's lives. So as an organization, y'all said, we're going to reach people with mess in their lives, which ought to be what the church is about, right? Jesus came for the sick, not for the healthy. And we're going to have to be unafraid to get into that mess ourselves. So how have y'all had to step into the mess of these lives? And maybe how have you coached other people that aren't also paid staff members to follow that same pattern of getting invested, transforming people in that way?
Well, your mom is probably better at it than I am, to be honest. She's
shout out.
Well, she has she has kind of a mothering personality where people really trust her right off. But yeah, it's a lot about just being genuine and being willing to walk with people and not be surprised by their stories. I think the point you made is true, though. When you become when you add grace filled with second chance, there's a tendency for people to want to come in and just kind of stay like they are. And so there is a challenge in trying to move them into the discipling process or into being a fully devoted follower of Christ. Sure. And so that's been my challenge as the lead minister, to try to teach and preach. But it's really a relational thing. I mean, you've just got to develop a relationship. People have to trust you. They're not going to follow you just because you're a good teacher necessarily. I mean, they at least in our context, they want to know if you're, Odessa is a boom and bust mentality. I don't know if that means much to this audience, but the oil business goes up, everybody's riding high, and there's money everywhere, and the oil business goes down, and everybody's broke and in trouble. And so it's almost a psychological implant on our community. So people are they're high and they're low, and they're high and they're low. And so, steadiness and just being consistent and being there for them, that's been a lot. And I think anybody can do that. I just think that's what friends do. So we're kind of spiritual friends to our members, and I think it's been a healthy way to minister to that type of people, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people who have not been part of a church family for a very long time, there are very few people who they actually give permission to drop the hammer on them for moral things or for not living rightly. Preachers typically have that permission. Your dad, Josh, has that permission to drop the hammer. You would probably as a youth minister. But by and large, just the regular person you're sitting by in church doesn't have that permission until they have formed a relationship. And once there's a trusted relationship where they know your heart, they know that you love them, then you can speak some godly wisdom over their lives, and they may or may not receive it, they may rewrite history. I've seen that where you're like, well, hey, why y'all living together? Then later on, their whole life's mantra becomes, don't live together. It's like they kind of rewrite history. But anyway, it's just, but until you're trusted by them, they don't want to hear it. They're not going to listen to it unless you have a position of authority over them.
Yeah, that is an interesting challenge for those that aren't official paid pastor types, is you have to earn the right more than maybe the preacher does or the minister, but that's most people. Most people aren't the pastor, aren't the preacher, and yet every single one of us is called to make disciples if we're Christians. So that's so good. And we talk about this all the time. Relational ministry is the key to discipleship. We've used the phrase on this podcast as well, like they don't care what you know until they know how much you care. That's exactly what y'all are talking about. Like you've got to earn the right in people's lives by building relationships with them, showing them that you care, showing them that you're not going to just immediately be offended by their life's story, but welcome them into your family, to your friendships.
Mitch, something I often tell new members is, listen, you guys have the greatest opportunity to know people that aren't part of our church or part of any church. This is probably your experience as well. When you've been in a church for a long time, almost all your friends are churched. You go to a small group with them, you play on softball teams with them, your sporting events, you go out and eat dinner. Almost everybody now after 15 years at New Life that we hang around with are already saved Christians. It's hard to find people in my life. I have to look for them at a club or some other place, a golf course, to find somebody that may not be a member of a church.
And by the club, we are talking about the dance club, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I've got the same moves you have, so potentially you can show those maybe in another podcast. But we'll get new members in that are just kind of freshly out of the world. They haven't been in church for years, and everybody they know doesn't go to church. And that would be, I would think, the same for your members here. Listen, look around. Who is it that you have influence over? Who do you hang with? And, get to know them, find out what's going on, and make sure you put that invite in. Divine appointments come at us all the time, but it's easier if you've already in relationship with these people. And so my encouragement would be, there's a lot of opportunities to influence people. And some people are in a position to do it a lot better than ministers are.
That's a good point. Yeah. He wasn't really talking about the dance club, by the way, listeners. Talking about the exercise club, right?
Mission Fitness.
Fitness.
Mitch, New Life Church calls it hot tub evangelism.
Hot tub? That sounds weird.
I often have an illustration of somebody I've talked to.
I've heard many of them. Yeah. I know. It's just awkward. Okay, I want to take a moment here to talk about the idea of influence over time and legacy. So it's a slight gear shift, but I think it's all related. Again, y'all have been involved in ministry together as a couple for 40-ish years, and hopefully for a few more to come. 15 or so, 17 summers, I think you said, in youth ministry. No doubt y'all collectively saw a lot of crazy kids, much as I have gotten to see a lot of crazy kids all over almost 15 years. Not quite there yet. But you also transitioned to different roles. You've always been involved in the ministry world. Now you work for the church. Dad, of course, has always worked for the church, but you guys have been church planters now for 15 years. And as we've already discussed, I would say especially since y'all have been at New Life in Odessa, have interacted with a lot of crazy. Is that fair? Maybe?
Some of it's our own.
Some of it's our own. Crazy in a good way, I think. But I get the point I'm trying to get here is sometimes when you invest in people, you don't immediately see the fruit of that. But hopefully you see eventually that fruit can come from those things, maybe not directly from you. But I wanted to ask y'all, how have you seen that be true in your lives? How have you seen investments that you made a long time ago, perhaps, maybe play out over time? So the influence over time and the idea of legacy, for people that have been involved in ministry for 40 years as volunteers as well as professionals, how have you seen this true, and how could it be possibly an encouragement to those that are listening? A lot of words, maybe only one question in there.
Well, I often tell, especially new youth ministers, and I've had several work for me at New Life, don't expect a teenager to thank you for a life-changing event right after a summer camp or something.
Sure.
They're pretty selfish in a sense. That's just the nature of that age. But down the road, and I said it might be 10 years, it might be 20, when you'll get a random call or a text sent you or your Facebook message, and somebody will say, "Hey, man, I really appreciate the time that you helped, direct me in this direction or that." So you just got to hang on for those times. Now we've been pretty lucky. We've worked at pretty healthy churches. I had a party thrown for me at our 10th year anniversary at our last church, and a lot of kids came back in ministry, and then we had a party thrown at our 20th anniversary, and kids and adults came back and loved on us, and then at New Life after 10 years we kind of had an appreciation. So if you strategically plan your own appreciation events,
you feel very affirmed.
Yes,
right?
People will write notes and even give you money, so it's a cool deal. But really, I think it's a time thing, but a lot of that's gone on as well. Now, specifically, I start almost every year at our church because we allow people that come in kind of broken. I start out every year with a prayer list of people that aren't married that I'd like to see in a covenant relationship, but living together and have children. And
you're saying they're already living together and have children.
Already living together, already have children,
married.
their families, but they're part of our church. And so I start with prayer, and then I influence and talk and love. And we've seen several of those. Almost all of the ones last year that were on our list, they had more time together, I guess, during COVID.
Because of COVID.
End up getting married. I mean, we had one Melinda, why don't you tell that story about the Salisas just showing up?
Yeah, that's one of our favorite stories, because they came to us having been together already for probably 10 years. They own a house together. They own a business together. They had 2 kids together. Since they've been here, they've had another child together, and he would introduce her as my gal. My gal. And anyway, we did not beat them around the head and shoulders about that at all, but they became part of our small group. And then one day they just said, we want to get married. Can we come at 5:15 on Monday afternoon? We just want it to be y'all and us. And so we did that. And afterwards I asked him, his name is Jesus. We call him Jesse. I just said, Jesse, what's this about? And he said, well, just as we have grown in our relationship with the Lord and read the scriptures and also seen some failures in our life, we decided we're not living in God's will. And we need to get married. They were already married in their hearts. Sure. But anyway, it's been the most fun thing in the world for them and also for us. Their kids were there, and it was just sweet. It's really rewarding when you see people walking forward, and it doesn't always happen. But the times that it does, it's just it makes it all worthwhile. You can't do it for that reason. You have to do it out of obedience. You can't do it for the rewards because many times they don't come.
Yeah.
But to just know that what you do is out of obedience to the Lord and the calling on your life, and then eventually you get to see rewards or hear about them later, even after you're gone.
That's a good point. I think about when I was in youth group, and of course you had moved out of youth ministry before I entered youth group, but as I was getting to high school, there was the Dudley family, Tim and Rhonda Dudley. They came in as small group leaders, and I didn't realize at the time, but y'all, I'm sure, told me that they had been, or at least one of them had been
Rhonda.
In y'all's youth group before, and things like that. And I have no idea what her life story was. I don't know if she had ups and downs and whatnot, but all I know is she came back with her husband to volunteer in the youth ministry that once upon a time had influenced her. So things like that are really cool to see, and I'm glad you guys have gotten to witness those. And again, this whole conversation has been in the context of people that work for the church, but we all work for the church, right? Yes. Every one of us that's a Christian, and you don't have to draw a paycheck from Clear Creek Church of Christ or New Life Church to be involved in this disciple-making ministry. And I don't think I told y'all before we started, but our church recently has adopted a new mission, which is simply to reach the next person for Jesus. And we like the simplicity of that, and that it's so action-oriented. Constantly be thinking, okay, who else? Who's next? Who's the next person that needs to be reached for Jesus? And it doesn't have any qualifiers. It doesn't require that they have already given up their cohabitation, gotten married. It's just who's next, and influence them. And the reason that worked, that story you're telling, is because y'all had invested relationally in the life of that couple, and through that preached God's word to them and talked with them, and just the influence of you and your church helped bring them to what we would say is a much more biblical place in their relationship. So it's pretty cool.
Right, and they got saved as well. So we were
I didn't realize that was part of it.
We were able to baptize both of them, and so
great.
It was a holistic process. We've been saying our little catchphrase at New Life is go and make Jesus famous. And by famous we mean if somebody doesn't know him. So we send our people out every week to say, go and make Jesus famous in the life of your coworker, your friends, your family. Start with your family, where you have the greatest influence, and just make sure you put in a good word for Jesus, and we can all do that. And for that matter, some of the greatest evangelists at our church are not us. Most of the people that come and visit, we've got some families we've got some grandmas that they just bring people. They bring sons and daughters and cousins and grandkids. It's just inspiring to me to see a grandparent come in with 5 or 6 grandchildren. Just the impact that could have down the future is just a really cool thing. So everybody's in this game.
Yeah.
And so I love that slogan, bring the next person to Jesus. That's what we're about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is it fair to say that most people that come to y'all's church didn't just stumble upon your Facebook live stream and be like, maybe they did, but most of them probably came because someone they know had a connection and they got invited that way, or maybe they were looking desperately for a second chance church and heard about it through someone else. And that's how it's supposed to work, I think. Well, that's all the time we've got to today. In case you were wondering, it's raining outside, dear listeners. That's why you can probably hear rain happening.
We had stories to tell about you growing up and stuff. So there's not going to be time for that.
You know what? I'm looking at the clock, and we're coming up on Am I your favorite child, though? Can you answer that one?
You are first.
Yeah. There's no other first except you.
That's true.
Yes.
I'm your favorite first child.
Favorite first child. Favorite first child. No doubt about it.
I guess that's all I'm going to get out of that today.
By the way, Clear Creek, we're very proud of Mitch Halston.
Oh, thanks. That's the only reason I actually brought them here today, was so they could say something affirming. It took all the way to the end of this podcast to get there, but I'm glad. I'm grateful for y'all. Thanks for coming into town and being willing to literally the day before get thrown into a podcast recording. But for all the rest of you guys out there that have been listening, hopefully you found some inspiration through these stories and through these principles and ideas here. But I just want to remind you, as we've said multiple times throughout this recording today, that if you are a follower of Christ, if you're a disciple, you are called to spread the good news of the kingdom to your neighbors throughout your city and to the very ends of the earth. Grace and peace.